Hello, in this video I'm going to be talking about how to use PowerPoint to make a poster, and in this case to make multiple posters for a museum exhibit. So first, when you're making your poster, you got to think about, when someone approaches it, what are they going to read first? And just naturally we tend to look at the top, and we tend to look at what's at the biggest font. So that's going to be your main point and theme that's going to run throughout your exhibit. And my main point theme is Americans and Filipinos together for victory. Right, I want to create this part of the exhibit to talk about how Americans and Filipinos supported each other during the Battle of Leyte. So I've got that at the top in the biggest font. And then I've got my paragraph that logically would probably be the next thing to look at, right? Kind of follows, your eye is naturally going to go from here to here, where I just explain a bit more about the context so that people can understand the photos and the captions. But here my focus is the guerrillas. Right, I'm looking at the Filipinos who took up arms to fight alongside American forces. So this is my broad theme, and everything needs to be connected to this broad theme. And then this part is just talking about this particular slide. So everything needs to be connected to this slide. This is focusing on the guerrillas, and I have two images that I think do that. Right. One, this is Colonel Ruperto Canglion, who was the leader of guerrilla forces on Leyte, and there he's meeting with an American official. So American and Filipinos together for victory. Boom, we've got American and Filipinos together. And this is about guerrillas. He's the major guerrilla leader. So I want to include that. And I think this is an amazing photo, and I think Canglion really looks like a tough guerrilla soldier. And I also wanted to include just an example of what a Filipino guerrilla might look like. And here is Guerrillero Bening, who was a Filipino guerrilla. Now, he's not necessarily typical. He's only 16, but he is an example of a average Filipino guerrilla soldier, right? This is a commander. I wanted to get in a guy who's just kind of your foot soldier. So you can see there's a logic here. You'll notice that, this is one font size. This is another. These captions are another. And they're close to the photo that they're describing to make it clear, okay, yeah, this goes with this, and it provides useful information. In this case, there's three guys. Someone might think this man is Canglion, so I want to make sure that this was Canglion. I don't give the names of these other two gentlemen, even though it's known, simply for space reasons, and that's something you have to kind of consider. Canglion's a focus, so I include him. Now, I wanted to also include a primary source describing the Filipino guerrillas, praising them in this case. I thought that would make it more powerful. I think it's important to include primary sources. I need to figure out a way to mark them so people can see they're different. So notice I created a title, and I want people to understand what this is about. So American praise for Filipino guerrillas. You know what this primary source is going to be about. Remember, when you have people going to a museum, a lot of times they're there to learn, but they also want to relax. So things need to be clear. So why am I reading all this material? Well, this is what it's about. And at the bottom, I say who this is from. It's from General Douglas MacArthur, and it's to Colonel Ruperto Canglion, and we have that there. I gave the date and the year so people understand this is before the Battle of Leyte. But this is MacArthur saying some good things about Canglion and connecting him to Leyte. So I thought this would be important that you see these Americans, an American voice at the time, appreciating Filipinos. Right? I wanted to get that in there to kind of emphasize this kind of alliance between us. So hopefully that makes sense. We're going to look at some more slides I did together, but right now I think it's also, I'm sorry, one thing I should also stress, notice I made it clear who said this and when. That's important to do. You don't necessarily have to give all the information you would give in say, a paper, but you do need to give people enough so they understand the exhibit. So that's what like a completed slide might look like. Let's just look a little bit at what one might look like that's not complete. So if you start with just a PowerPoint slide, I just want to point out you can change the layout. So we could make this one image, and we could then start off just adding a picture. And so this is from a family picture from our visit to the USS Yorktown. So maybe you wouldn't use this as a museum exhibit, but it is a World War II image. So I wanted to include that. So you've got your image, and if you click on the image, these little circles will pop out, and you can make the image bigger or smaller, as you see fit, right? And it's one reason I want people to use PowerPoint to make their posters. It's really easy to manipulate things. You just move it around. Now, you may say, well, I like this image, but it's too big. I need to figure out a way, and I mean too big not in the sense that I want to, that I can't resize it. I mean, I don't want all these clouds. So if you right-click, it'll bring up all this information. Bring to front means like one image goes above the other, so you can change if you want it in a different place. Lots of different stuff you can do. I'm going to hit crop. And these little buttons come out, and what they do is actually cut off stuff. So instead of resizing the whole thing, they just cut off stuff. So I can make this smaller if I want to. And now I've got a smaller image that I can make bigger if I want, or smaller, however I want to do it. And if I want to insert another image, I can just go Insert Picture, and it will bring up a bunch of other pictures. It's not World War II, but this is just oops, that's the wrong one. I was playing with how to edit images, and that was one where I failed. There we go. So you can insert images that way. That's me and Mrs. Donna Knight at a living history event. And we can make that, we can crop out. We can say, well, we don't want this person here. We don't want this person here. Let's keep the flag, make it small. Boom, then we can resize it. And then you can go to Insert Text Box. And we can do a horizontal text box. And, we can just draw it and then write out what we want. And then you can select, you can move it around if you want. You can make it bigger if you want. Notice I didn't have to actually highlight the text. You can highlight the text, but you don't always have to. But you can make it bigger or smaller. You can change the font. You can do all sorts of things that way. So you'll notice, so that just gives you an idea how you can manipulate things. That's why I like this, because it's easy to just move stuff around. And you want to just, when you're thinking about it, you don't want it to be so small people can't read it. You need to have it big enough that people can read it. I just want it to look all right. Now, one other thing I want to show you is if you go to Design, you can do these different themes if you want. You can find one that you think works well for a museum. You'll notice I didn't actually use a theme. I think they make it, in my case, it made it too busy and it was already busy enough. You can click Format Background, though, and you can choose a color that you like. So you could make it gray or however you want to do it. You can apply to all if you want, and it would make them all gray. But that's not what I want to do. So that just gives you a sense of all these different things you can do. You can get fancy with that. The major thing is you just want it to be easy for your audience to read. So let's go back to our slideshow. So I just want to explain a little bit more about what I'm doing here. So again, last time I talked about the gorillas, I wanted to talk about there were other things that people are doing, not just the gorillas. So I included 2 images of Filipinos moving supplies, and I explained that here. That there were other ways that Filipinos helped out other than just fighting, and one was moving supplies, and I have that one. And I've got here with 2 American soldiers and then a carabao, or water buffalo, helping to carry supplies. And I give information in the captions. Now notice with the captions, I have it so that it is going to the right. It's centered right, and that makes it flat against the picture, and I think that looks better. If it's centered left, it would be ragged against the picture. But basically, I've tried to create some balance here. Here you have Filipinos helping Americans. Here you have an American helping a Filipino, because remember, it's called mutual support. So I was trying to talk about how we helped each other. I didn't want it to look like, just the Americans are rescuing the Filipinos, or I don't want people to think it was only soldiers. There were lots of people involved in different ways. So that's something to emphasize. And to move on to our next slide, again, I wanted people to, there's a kind of logic, it says Filipino support and independence. And I like these images because they show Filipinos actively supporting the United States. Here's a little boy spontaneously saluting an American soldier on the day of the invasion. These women produced this American flag shortly after the invasion, so it seems like it was an old flag that they had kept hidden, which could have endangered them. And this is a really fascinating picture of this American soldier with this Filipino kid looking up to him and taking care of this Filipino child. And these all show American support. But one thing your exhibit should not simply be a celebration. I mean, it's okay to have celebratory aspects, but it does also need to deal with realistic history. And there's this question, why is it, and I bring this up if you read through this, I point out that the Dutch, they had colonized Indonesia for about 4 centuries. And so many Indonesians welcomed the Japanese when they invaded and saw the Japanese as liberators. And that's certainly how the Japanese presented themselves. Filipinos resisted the Japanese to a large extent. And the question is, why would Filipinos not see the Japanese as liberators when many Indonesians did? And here I try and explain that. I don't want the people who who come to this exhibit just to think, well, the Filipinos support the Americans because Americans are just awesome and wonderful. And I do think we are pretty awesome and wonderful, but that's not the only reason why Filipinos support us. It's because we had promised we would leave. The Dutch had made no such promise. They were going to keep staying as long as they could. But the Americans in 1935 had told the Filipinos, we will leave the country by 1945. And this was a response to Filipino demands. We'll leave the country by 1945. In the 10 years between now and 1945, we're going to help you build a government so that when we leave, you'll be okay. And so one reason Filipinos supported the Americans and fought back against the Japanese made no such promise. They did not promise that they were going to leave. And they didn't give a clear timetable like the Americans did. So the Filipinos realized, hey, if the Japanese are going to keep us as a colony, just like they kept Korea as a colony, so we want to fight on behalf of with the Americans, because the Americans will help us to kick out the Japanese, and the Americans, we think, will keep their promise for us to become independent, and certainly we did. And so I just wanted, I didn't want people to come into this and just think, well, ask this question, why were the Filipinos supportive? Well, it's just because we're awesome. I didn't want them to think that way. That's a bad historical lesson. The reason the Filipinos support us was because we took them seriously and were willing to give them what they were what they wanted. And that's one thing one lesson I want people to learn is that in order to have international cooperation, it's a give and take relationship, right? That you got to get something out of it. And it's so that one thing that you did have these very close bonds between Filipinos and Americans was because there was this actual real shared interest. So that's an important thing to get into these as well. But you have to do that in a clear way. You have to do that in a way that your audience will actually listen to, right? If I just launched into some kind of criticism of American imperialism or something like that, they probably wouldn't listen to me. But in this way, by combining these photos showing real Filipino support for the Americans, I can explain why they were willing to give that support in a historically accurate and responsible way that in some sides is celebratory, but also is good academic history.